Good morning, everybody. I do want to, and thank you for the welcome, Jason. It's good to see everybody. A lot of many old friends I haven't seen for a long time. So it is, as Sveta said, a good community to be part of. And I do want to give a shout out. Jason mentioned the book, Not Just Where to Click. My co-editor, Heather, is here, who is a great partner in that book. So cannot go without acknowledging that. And thank you to the team from COD, DePaul, Jen, Christine, Jason, Jill, Sveta, and Fee. I think that's everybody for your work getting ready for this. I know how much work it is to bring everybody together. So thank you for that. So lots to talk about today. I'm going to try to be efficient and see if, Jason mentioned like ideas that we're wrestling with. And as you will see, I'm still wrestling with a lot of these ideas. So I want to start with a kind of disclaimer, right? I am, I was a history major, political science major. I went to library school. I got a PhD in higher ed, studying technology policy in community colleges. So if there's anyone on earth you probably shouldn't listen to about neuroscience and psychology, it may well be me, right? So I went on this kind of voyage to try to understand how we actually handle information once it goes through our eyeballs and into our ears and what happens in the brain, because I felt like there was this need. But I also want to give this disclaimer that, it is dangerous to dabble in other disciplines, and I promise you there are things I've misunderstood, things I could know better, and probably everything that I talked to you about today you should take with a big grain of salt and explore on your own, absolutely. And along with that is also disclaimer number 2, is I'm going to talk a lot about how the mind works, how the brain works, and I'm going to do this in very sweeping general ways and make an assumption of a neuronormative brain. And I just want to say from the outset that number 1, there is no average brain. That doesn't exist, right? Every brain is different. Every brain in a body has different experiences, but some brains are more different than others. And just for the sake of focus today, thinking about things like folks on the spectrum, people with like high levels of empathy, ADHD, even physical damages to the brain. There's a lot of those things that I'm not going to be able to address because it's just, we would never be out of here. But I do want to acknowledge that from the outset. So, like some of us in the room, when you asked who had been at the very first Information Literacy Summit, I raised my hand. I started in the generation where the internet was new and Google was barely even out there, right? And there were these ugly search engines, and I was in classrooms with students who were doing research and finding information that was so clearly not as good as the stuff our library offered, right? If you took the Pepsi challenge to what we offered, to what they were finding here, no comparison. And so that brought me, for like over 20 years, my question has been, I've been trying to track down in all different kinds of ways, why do our students get engaged and believe some stuff and not the other stuff? And of course, that's true for all of us, right? And especially in our polarized world, all of us are probably thinking about these kind of things now. If you give a group of people the same information sources, they definitely do not come out with the same results. And why does that matter? Why do we think about that? How can we possibly understand this? And especially at the time, we talked a lot about credibility and authority, and we had checklists, and we looked at source types and all these different kinds of things. And I have kind of gone down a few different avenues trying to understand how we could do this better. And over the last few years, really the pandemic helped. I did a ton of reading in neuroscience and psychology, which resulted in this book. And you may say, is this a commercial? Yes, sure. If I would encourage you to buy this for your libraries. If you're really interested, I do have a discount code for the book if you want to buy a copy for yourself. And there is a paperback on the way, so yes. But nonetheless, it means a lot to be here at the summit, because a lot of the ideas that really come up through this book, I've presented at breakout sessions at various places here. The summit has been a great place for me to test ideas and to think about ideas and to be forced to focus in ideas because I had to do a presentation. And so as much as this book represents the last few years of crunching through things, it really represents a whole lot of time and conversation with many of the people who are here, and I do appreciate you all for that. One of the things that Heather and I tried to do is to find a person to write a chapter in our book that covered this stuff, and we couldn't find that person. And so I felt like, well, I was kind of like, well, crap, I guess I gotta write it. And so that's what we did. So I'd like to start by asking you some questions. and for you to think a little bit about these questions. So you may even want to use a piece of paper and jot down some answers. There's only 4, so you probably can remember these. And some of you may know a few of these even, so here we go. Question number 1, I want you to think about this answer. So Linda is 32, and she is quite proud of her fitness level. She passes all cardiovascular tests and is proud of the work she has put in to get in shape. What is more likely? Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller who runs 5 miles a week? Okay, don't say it out loud yet. Write it down. We'll be back in a second. All right, so hold that in your head. Question number 2. Who was the 8th president of the United States? And you cannot Google it. You can see people thinking, going back, Washington, Adams, Jefferson. All right, got it? All right, question number 3. Math question. So you didn't know there's going to be math today, but there's math today. A bat and ball costs $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? See all the looks across the tables at each other, like, All right, everyone good on that one? And the last question, this one is great because there is no right answer, so you're automatically right. The current federally mandated minimum wage is $7.25 per hour. If you could change the law to update what the minimum wage should be today, what would that be? Okay, so let's go back. So now I'm going to go back to the first question. And before I give you the answers, I'm going to go through these one more time. All right? And this time I want you to take note of how you feel about these answers. So let me explain what I mean by how do you feel about this. So number 1 is there is no right way to feel. So some of you may feel confident. Some of you may feel confused. Some of you may feel angry. Some of you may feel annoyed that we're doing this exercise. I don't know what the right answer is, but a feeling is a thing that comes from your body. This is a technique that people often use when they talk to themselves. So to think about even ask your chest, how do I feel about this question? And see what radiates back to you. So we're going to go through these one more time, and then we'll talk about answers and some feelings. So again, we have Linda. Is she a bank teller? Is she a bank teller that runs 5 miles? Reflect. 8th president, there might be some interesting feelings on this. We love the 8th president. Bat and ball, how does this feel? And then last, the minimum wage, this one could be interesting, right? If you've had minimum wage jobs, know people that have minimum wage jobs. All right, so this is the point where I want to ask for some thoughts from the floor. So we had a microphone to share. Could someone, number 1, just give me the answer for this? A or B, you have a 50% chance. A. All right. How many Bs? All right, interesting. So have you selected A? Anyone want to tell me how come A?
All things being equal, it is more likely for one thing to be true than 2 things to be true at a given point. So it's more likely that Linda is a bank teller than Linda is a bank teller and her mode of exercise is 5 miles a week.
Okay. Anyone want to argue for B? After that, everyone's like, no, I don't want to argue for B. Yeah. All right, so yes, the correct answer is A. And another way to think about it, right, is if you think about all the population of bank tellers who are out there, all the different ways you could be cardiovascularly fit, swimming, running, biking. And if you're looking at likelihood, so you're randomly grabbing someone out of that group, it's more likely that Linda is just a bank teller than she's a bank teller that runs 5 miles a week. Maybe she runs 10 miles a week. Maybe she runs 1 mile a week. You don't really know, right? So this is called a base rate neglect error. This is common in behavioral economics. This is from the researchers Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. And Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for this kind of thing, right? So, but this is like our brain makes judgments. Oh, and I almost forgot the feeling. Tell me about the feeling part of this. That's the more important part than the answer, sorry. And you want to talk about how they felt about this? There's normally some interesting feelings out here. Yeah, Microphone's there.
I felt. Oh. Hello? Oh. I felt irritated.
Yeah, how come? Good.
Okay. There's not enough information. I don't like either answer.
Yeah.
I don't like any of it.
Yeah, okay, good. Logical. Yeah, good. That's fantastic. Other feelings? Mm-hmm. No. She's good. Make sure we can hear.
I felt annoyed it was the only multiple choice question.
That the others weren't multiple choice too? Yeah. Yeah. All right, so more annoyance. Okay, all right, just for the sake of time, we'll go on. I'll say, right, so just a note, right, it's not just enough that we know an answer, but that there's the feeling that came along with that answer, right? So this one probably has some interesting feelings. So who was the 8th president of the United States? Does anyone know? Yeah, you know? Amazing. Guess if you have a large enough room, eventually someone knows. Who is it?
What if I don't really know?
I don't know. Well, maybe I don't really know. Yeah.
I'm going to go with Van Buren.
Yes, Martin Van Buren. Very nice. Yeah. So obviously I chose that on purpose, right? If I wanted to know the first, right? So yeah, congratulations. COD will have a prize for you on your way out. So how about the feeling on this? Anyone want to share their feelings on this? How many people knew that they didn't know? Right? How many people knew that they knew? Just a few. All right, so, oh, good, man, this is a record, yeah. Yeah, and a comment in the back. Tell me about how you felt about this.
I put as a note that it's unneeded information for me because
Right.
I can look it up at any time.
Yes,
and I know
right.
how to find the exact information.
That's right. Yeah, so annoyed that I asked you because what the hell? Yeah, good. Yes. All right, so how about the bat and ball? How much does the ball cost? Okay, I hear 5 cents. Any other answers? Everyone's scared to say it, right? How many people thought 10 cents? It's okay. Yeah, right? So that seems like the logical thing to do. It's $1. There's $1 there, $1.10. Let's subtract. I get 10 cents. Can anyone explain why 5 cents? Can I explain why 5 cents? Yeah.
So if it has to be $1 more than the ball, so if the ball is 5 cents, then the bat is $1.05, which is exactly $1 more.
Yes. So. And $1.05 plus 5 cents equals $1.10, right? So we can do it the other way. If it was 10 cents, for the 10-cent people who aren't convinced, so the ball costs 10 cents. If the bat is $1 more, then the bat would be $1.10. If you add 10 cents to $1.10, you get $1.20, not $1.10. So that way it cannot be. Now, how did you feel about this? So this is one, unlike the president question, you can get an answer, right? It might be a wrong answer, but you can normally come up with some kind of answer. Yeah, in the back.
I actually have a question.
Yes.
What about tax?
Yes, right. We're in a tax-free zone in DuPage, so it's good. Yeah.
I hated this question. I wrote down, I'm dumb, I hate math.
Yeah, right, yeah. Okay. Don't take it out on math, but yes. So a lot of us, right, you see this question, and even if you can't get the answer, and you've been to these things before, right? I didn't just pick this question just to see if you could subtract. If I wanted to know if you could subtract, I could say the bat together it's $1.05. The ball costs 5 cents. How much is the bat? You get $1.05, right? That's easy. I asked this question for a purpose, and even inside of you, you're kind of like, what is this joker up to, right? Like, I don't want to be a sucker. What's happening? And we do that all the time, right? So that feeling comes up like, oh, you're playing a game with me. I'll play your game, but I don't know quite what it is, right? So it generates that feeling behind it. And quickly, how do we feel about $7.25? Everyone felt good. That's the right minimum wage, right? How many people thought it should be higher? Okay. And we want to talk about how you feel about this one. We won't get into the exact numbers necessarily. So I see a hand up here. Can we get a microphone over here? Yeah.
I think it's more frustrating. I think because we're all in a position where we don't suffer from this, but we know a lot of people who do. And so it's frustrating because we're very empathetic. I'm making a generalization, but I'm believing that we're all very empathetic. And so it's frustrating to see that such a low number.
Right, yeah. Any other comments on how feelings? In the back, yeah.
I think for me, like when I was doing my first part-time job as a kid. When I first got my driver's license, it was like over 20 years ago. I was making like $6.25 an hour at the Gap in Gurney Mills, if you guys all know where that is. So the fact that it's still like only $7.25 an hour 20 years later is not great.
Yeah, yeah. One more comment. Yeah, go ahead.
I felt enraged.
Yeah.
But primarily because it is just such a low number and it's stayed that way for so long, and it's incredibly frustrating. And it, my general response to that is just to be very upset.
Right. Yeah, good. So this is the thing, right? There is no right answer to this. So the economists can make arguments and we can look at data, and there's all kinds of interesting logical ways to approach the minimum wage. But also when we approach it, we think about those kind of things. Like if I had a minimum wage job, or who are the people in our society that have minimum wage jobs? What's the purpose for work? Should a minimum wage job be enough to live on? All of these kind of things, right? Maybe a family member owns a business and they hire a lot of people with minimum wage, at minimum wage, and they're trying to keep their business afloat. There's all different ways, things that come into play for what is the right answer to what should the minimum wage be. But in the end, the only way that we can decide is it has to feel right. You kind of look at it and you say, 15, 25, 8, I don't know, right? And it comes out of here and you're like, oh, okay, this is where we are, right? So this is one of those great things where there may be a lot of disagreement, and it's hard to get to that answer, right? And it's a value judgment, and ultimately it is a feeling. So just to get to one of the key points, right? So obviously, right, we're trying to think about feelings. And this is a quote from Charlie Kaufman, who's a screenwriter. His great work, I think it's Adaptation, a few years ago. He was speaking on Fresh Air, and I was driving, listening to the podcast, and I about drove off the road trying to write this down as I was going. So I went back online and confirmed it. So if you bear with me, I will read it to you, because I think he's talking about fiction in this, but it captures, I think, the idea. And I think once you hear this, all of us as librarians will kind of get it. So he says, to me, when I relate to a piece of fiction, or a novel or something, it isn't that it makes me step outside myself, although sometimes there are those kind of books. But I mean, the things that I really relate to is when I read something that has articulated something that I felt, but I haven't been able to articulate. So a thing that's been carried with you, and when you hear it captured in words, you feel the truth of it. It hits you like, oh, that is how the world works. And it lines up with what you see. So it's not that you're always getting these new ideas out of nowhere and seeing things anew, even though sometimes that happens. It's the things that touch our lives that are the most powerful. And I thought this was a great way to capture this idea that comes out of psychology called the feeling of knowing, that it's not enough to have logic and rationality when we make decisions, but to know a truth is to feel a truth. To know something is to feel that thing. So this is, again, out of the psychology literature. They differentiate, or many people, I gotta say, there isn't consensus on this, but the people who work on this differentiate between feelings and emotions. And this is the thing that I see really get confounded in the education literature, and absolutely in the librarianship and information science literature, that we confuse feelings and emotions as the same thing. And a lot of researchers are saying, no, they're not the same thing. So a feeling is a mental sensation. It's a communication from your body into consciousness. Sometimes that communication is, oh, I'm really hungry. Sometimes that communication is, oh, I just stabbed my toe into the corner of a bookcase. Sometimes that communication is, this person's trying to fool me, or I now see the truth, and it radiates into consciousness and we're aware of it. So it's a metacognitive layer added around the things that we know, especially when we're talking about knowing a thing. And the way to think about it, right, is that our brain has unconscious processing happening along with our consciousness. And our unconscious processing is sending those signals into our consciousness so that we are aware. So how does it come to us? It comes to us as a feeling. And just a note about emotion. So you may say, oh, if emotions and feelings aren't the same thing, what is an emotion? So I just want to address this quickly. An emotion, by many researchers, is defined as a cognitive response, which is exactly opposite how most of us think of it. Most of us think about cognition and affect. Cognition is thinking, affect is feeling. And what they're showing is there is no thinking without feeling, and so we cross that line. But also, emotion helps us recognize what's important. So an interaction, I feel fear, I feel pride, I feel love, I feel anger. Those are things that highlight our our cognitive responses, but it's not the same as a bodily feeling radiated in. Now, just because I say it's a thing doesn't mean it's a thing. These are just different ways to think about how the brain operates. In reality, it's very blurry. And so in every researcher you read, everyone has their own different approaches to how they define these words. But I found that to be very useful to differentiate between emotion and feeling as I've gone through these pieces. So let's talk a little bit more about the neuroscience and kind of what our brains actually do. First off, from an education standpoint, if you would ask a neuroscientist what is learning, for a neuroscientist, learning is actually a physical change that happens in your brain. Your brain is actually building neural pathways or strengthening neural pathways, and sometimes letting neural pathways weaken and fall away. So if you don't do a thing for a long time, that neural pathway that's been built will eventually fade away and it won't be as strong as it was in the past, right? To be a master, it is super clear in the literature. This is absolutely agreed upon. If you want to achieve mastery, you have to spend hours and hours and hours doing a thing. The 10,000 hour rule is kind of a myth, but also kind of absolutely true. But here's the but. You can't stop. Once you stop, your mastery atrophies. It goes away. It falls down, right? Some things in your life you will always probably be able to do at some level. So my youngest daughter is playing clarinet. I've played a little clarinet here and there, and I can play a really mean Jingle Bells. So I probably will always be able to play Jingle Bells on a clarinet my whole life because of the time I spent playing clarinet. But beyond that, there's like not beyond that, right? So somewhere that neural pathway is locked into my brain, but all the other things I used to be able to play have vanished, right? And I think all of us know that. Like when you come into a topic like, oh, I used to be really good at this, and now it's gone. So mastery requires work. And I think also importantly for education is that one thing we really misunderstand is the goal of the mind is to make things as automated as possible. They want you to be, so you get in the car, you drive to work, you're thinking about all these things, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I'm at work, right? Automatic driving. That's absolutely evolutionary biology at work, right? Because when you don't have to think about it, you react faster, and that's our ancestors who lived. Our slow-thinking ancestors have long been eaten by the tigers and lions, and they're not in the DNA pool anymore. We've left them behind. So the goal is to get really good at a thing to a point where you don't have to think about it anymore, and it's just automatic, which I think has some interesting implications for us in the classroom when you think about engagement. Not that we want our students to be on autopilot, right? But also that we are, when students do fall away and students do fall into non-thinking kinds of modes, we should be recognizing that, oh, some of this is pre-programmed in all of us, and that's things that we can maybe find strategies to address. Most of the work that happens in our brain, thank God, is hidden away, and this is known as the hidden layer, right? So right now, if I had to consciously think about monitoring the glucose levels in my blood or managing the salts that are getting moved from place to place, I probably wouldn't be up here standing and be very good at talking, right? So all of this is happening behind the scenes. We don't think about it. On top of that, our brain is always operating kind of cognitively where we hold understandings of the moment and we're anticipating what's about to happen. So we have schemas about everything around us, and we're comparing the schema we have in our head to the inputs that we're bringing into our brain. And of course, a big part of this, right, is memory is totally hidden away. So right now, if you think about your third grade teacher, many of us, right, can pull that person's image, maybe not the name. Mrs. Hewitt in Cambridge, Illinois, is my third grade teacher. Can pull that into your mind, right? So where was that stored? I don't know. It's back there. What's the capital of North Dakota? I don't know. Does anyone know? Pull it into your brain. But how does that get locked away? Memory, ironically, right? The goal of memory is to remember things, but we don't even really know how we access it, how it works. All hidden, all behind the scenes, outside of consciousness. So often, many times, we can know what we think, but we don't know why we're thinking it or how we got there, because it comes into our brain in all these different kinds of ways in interactions. And just to continue a little bit about memory, I think it matters. We think of memory as this recording device sometimes, and especially I think our students do. The goal of memory is not really about the past. The goal of memory is to prepare you for the future, for future encounters. And when you think about it that way, it helps us really understand how memory works. Emotionally charged things really get locked away. Details of what was actually said, what was the color of somebody's shirt, all of those kind of things, if they don't really matter, they all blur away. The first time you do something is going to be way more intense and locked into memory than the 14th time that you've done that same thing, right? And so we often misunderstand that, and another thing is time. If you say years, we are not good at thinking in years. So when I say, what were you doing in 2014? You have to go back and think, oh, I had a kid born in 2012, and I was working here, and you kind of count a few years down, right? You have these markers of years, and then you go up, because we just don't capture time in that same way in our brain. I'm going to skip over the details of explicit and implicit memories. I've hit some of this. Sorry, I'm wandering off my slides. So this gets to another key idea, which is that the brains are modular. So we should not think of our brains as a brain. We are not a unified whole. There are always subsystems working, doing different kinds of things. Consciousness, our conscious selves, are only a part of that. They're not the whole thing. And that's a big illusion that consciousness gives us, which is good, because if we were always kind of fighting with ourselves in our mind, I don't know if we would function very well. So it gives us this unified narrative, but also that we should be skeptical of that narrative all the time. So this gets me to where I drew my title from, right? So to think about how we make decisions, to think about why we get to where we do when it comes to knowing things and interacting with the world. I love this quote from Robert Burton, who's a physician, but he writes about consciousness and neuroscience. So again, bear with me. He says, to get to the idea, so this is talking about decision making, to get to an idea of the magnitude of this process, imagine billions of committee members. And if you're in higher ed or maybe just education, right, this feels like committee metaphor, like this is great, right? Billions of committee members, each with at least 10,000 hands, reaching out to shake hands, prod, poke, seduce, or fend off the other members. Miraculously, this orgy of utter chaos is transformed into a relatively seamless and focused stream of consciousness. So at any time you're making a decision, there is an interplay between the goals of your brain, the different subsystems. So in the morning I get up and I get on the scale and I think, ooh, I need to not have that Frappuccino on my drive home. Go through your day and you have your work and you get in that car and you're like, ooh, what a day. You know what I deserve? I deserve that Frappuccino, but should I have it? Those moments when you're debating, right? When you're like, should I do this? Or there's a million other times. That's literally parts of your mind at war with each other, trying to figure out, what am I going to do, right? And so to see that in action, I give in and normally get the Frappuccino because it's been a rough day. But to think, this is our minds, our modular minds working together to get things done. And so, again, you think about what does it mean to know a thing, right? It's a different perspective than the traditional Western view of knowledge from Descartes, where we're rational people with the interruptions of emotions sprinkled on top. So we are guided and influenced by the feelings that come to us from these unconscious processing. So when I say to know something, I would say there's two aspects to knowing. There's the thing to be known, which the neuroscientists would say is the memory, right? And there's the judgment that our unconscious self is making about that stuff, the metacognitive judgments, the feeling of knowing wrapped around those things, which we kind of dabbled around with this morning. So we can think of some different ways to play around with this, right? So there are times where we have the thing and we have the feeling about the thing and it hits us and we know this is where I need to go, this is what I need to do. And if you've been, if you're writing or do research or even in the classroom, right, when those moments hit you and you see something new, that feeling that you've had with you that you haven't been able to articulate, it's that powerful aha moment. And this is generally what we want to do in education, right, is get the students to see, here's the thing to know, and here's why you would know it, and the justification, we feel it and we get it, right? Now there's some times where we don't have either thing. Like, I don't know the answer, like Martin Van Buren, I don't know. I know that I don't know, right? We're clear that we don't know it. And that's also very useful in teaching, to get students to recognize that in ourselves. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know the stuff that I need to know. Then you're open, you can go down new paths. Now, sometimes we know it, but we don't know that we're right. We're like, is this it? Or I'm dealing with it. And then eventually you can clarify, hunt things down. And then, of course, the last option is sometimes we have the feeling and we can't quite get to the thing, right? Like, I know that. And William James, right, the father of psychology, talks about the draw of mysticism. The last time, like last weekend when you were taking acid maybe, you may have the same feeling, like the psychedelics talk about this too, where you can have these great feelings of the universe and you know this great truth, but you can't quite capture what that truth is. And I kind of joke about it, but there is some seduction of trying to get to that truth, trying to go to that truth. And this is some people use this as explanations for why we fall down some of the paths that we fall down, because we want to see the reality that's out there, even if we don't have the knowledge around it to lock it into place. And I want to really emphasize so often, and this comes out of, it's Aristotle, Plato, Descartes, all the way through. We think of ourselves as these rational beings with this lizard mind, at the core of it. And if we can just get the emotions out of our rationality, we can make good decisions. We can make logical decisions. And as you read through this, it is so obvious that that's not at all how our minds work. That our minds, without feelings, you can't. There are people that argue without feelings there is no consciousness. To be conscious, to have the subjective awareness experience of consciousness, you have to have feelings. And if you don't, there is no consciousness. And that is true then with how we know things. So let's shift over. Check my time. Quickly about how some of this might be thought of in terms of information literacy and the things that we think about where we work. First off, I want to just do some basic definitions. Information versus knowledge. So Donald Case, who's a writer in information science, has some good textbooks out there, talks about information as patterns of reality. And I think this is an absolutely excellent definition for what is information. Information is, to me, you hold the schemas about the world. It could be things internally, it could be things externally. When something doesn't match your expectations, you experience information. Something you notice that is different, something that gives you a message from the outside, sometimes from the inside. So this is good. So this is the patterns of reality. That's information. Where knowledge, I would argue, is something different. So sometimes we talk about knowledge as information, like we take the book off the shelf and just shove it into our head. That's not really what it is, right? Knowledge is the thing to be known with the feelings around it. And those feelings come from our experiences, from our lives, from our understandings of how the world works, right? So information versus knowledge. Ultimately, it's clear, right, that there is no objective experience. It doesn't mean that we can't try for objectivity, and it doesn't mean that we can't try to understand where other people come from. But everything that we go through puts us in a subjective view of the world. The schemas that we build are based on, naturally, the experiences that we live, the things that we read, the people that we know. And the researchers really like the term my side bias. So it's not seen necessarily as a negative, but just the reality of I come from my perspective. My worldview, my beliefs are how I'm going to see the world. So we can't escape those biases that we carry with us. But of course, right, we know those biases also have problems with the confirmation bias. The feeling of knowing is powerful, but it doesn't mean that it's right. Just because we have a feeling of knowing doesn't mean it's accurate. So even when we feel that way, we have to guard ourselves against how that might look. So beliefs preserve themselves. It causes us to ignore evidence, which makes sense, right? So you can't recognize a thing as a thing if you don't know about that thing. So that's, there was a time, and I see Tish is in the back. We did a workshop with some of our librarians, and we were talking about the framework for information literacy, and it was new. And I don't remember which frame it was, but they're like, how could this is fantastic. I never knew I should be assessing this stuff. How can I assess this in my class if I didn't know that this was a real thing? So, okay, that's good for this. So think about like evaluating sources. To me, and I think this might make sense for a lot of you, right? We talk so much about evaluating sources, and I often wonder if we should start with evaluating sources by pointing back at ourselves, right? How do you, if you think this is compelling information, what is it about you that helps you think that? Like, what is the reflection back? So to evaluate yourself before you evaluate those sources, and to know about, like, what is that feeling of knowing that you might have? So how much can we deconstruct the beliefs that we hold, even selecting a topic. So if we're gonna have students do a paper, that's often my mindset is the freshman year, first year, like, right, research paper, and you have to pick a topic. Why is this topic compelling? What makes it compelling? What is it into your life? You know, everyone says all research is biographical research at some level. I think that's probably true, but can we see the experiences that we have that help us move in one direction? Do we see where our existing beliefs fit into this, and to recognize that we're not neutral? And of course, there may be reasons why we're wrong, and are we open to make those changes? Many of you may know Mike Caulfield. He just had a brand new book come out, by the way. I've not read it yet, but I would just give a shout out. He does good work. This is from his student fact checker online book. And he just says, hey, we should take notice. If you come across a piece of information and you have any reaction to it, you should notice that reaction. If it makes you happy, if it makes you agree with it, you should notice that as much as if it makes you angry or you disagree with it. Because often it's the stuff we agree with that can lead us down the right path. So if you find a piece of information or the wrong path, find a piece of information and you're like, oh, this is great. What do? You stop looking for other things, right? So you can fall into that pit of rightness, the feeling of knowing, and you could miss other answers that might be out there. So I think that's useful. What does it mean to be an expert? And I've thought about this quite a bit, right? It's not just enough to know a lot of things, even though that's part of being an expert. I think part of expertise and really spending decades knowing a thing, you start to build that those feelings, right? The intuition about how it could work. And again, that doesn't mean there can be blind spots to experts, as we all know. But it also is more than just like regurgitating the stuff that you've shoved into your head. And to me, this is a big one. I've been in higher ed for a long time, and every single teacher I've ever spoken to teaches critical thinking. But somehow with all of us students, critical thinking doesn't seem to change from the start to the end of many classes, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think sometimes the idea that we can give some information and sprinkle on some logic and ask them to look at the other side of an argument and then produce some kind of great outcome misses the point a little bit, right? That we need to think critically in terms of like, how are we looking at our unconscious processing? How are we looking at our own biases? How are we reflecting back into our own feeling of knowing to get to those kind of outcomes? I really like this, and again, unfortunately for Tish, she's in the office next to me, so I steal her great ideas. And since she's in the room, I will acknowledge that. She mentioned to me I should look at feminist standpoint theory, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I won't pretend to be an expert on this at all, right? But there's a thing that comes out of this is knowing as strategy, where you can place yourself in history, in power relationships, look at yourself where you stand in the world, and be reflective on that, and use that as a way to understand knowing and to understand information interactions that are out there. I think it's good. I think a lot of the conversations that have happened in the last 20 years around critical pedagogy, critical information literacy, I think they make a lot of sense with the feeling of knowing and then combining that into this standpoint theory. I think it's a way to make it a lot more practical and thoughtful. And so this is really good stuff, and I hope you all go out and write the next great paper on that so I can read it, because I don't know that I have it all figured out. And how do our assignments look with this, right? How do we build things that encourage students to engage their beliefs? And I think this is a big challenge. I work with some faculty members, and one faculty member who's a really good friend of mine teaches speech, and she asks students to find a brand new technology that they've never heard of. And her thought is they're wide open, they're not biased on anything. And I always feel like it's such a missed opportunity because you don't challenge your own beliefs. The way to get to reflection and a feeling of knowing is to find those charged topics, I think, which is always a little dangerous in education, and to get students to reflect on how those things work and why they believe what they believe. And so I don't know if I have the answers on that either, but I've been thinking a lot about how do we get assignments that make sense and challenge students to be reflective, and to talk about the threshold concepts from ACRL, our framework. And I know that not everyone in here is necessarily an academic librarian, but we think about these thresholds that we cross. And I think the feeling of knowing and making those intuitive understandings, I think, is a useful way to think about how we cross the thresholds and what we're doing in that space in between when we start as a novice and we want to become an expert, what's happening in here in the middle before we get to that end point, right? As we're building our own feelings, as we're challenging our beliefs. So in the book, I do argue for a new threshold that's related to the feeling of knowing. I won't read this to you because I don't know that I have it quite figured out. But again, I'm encouraged, I hope as a profession we can think about these kind of things. But we need, I think, to figure out how to get reflective practice more into what we do and to pull this idea of the feeling of knowing up more into what we do in terms of dealing with information sources. And this is, to me, the biggest question, and I don't know the answer. This is really, I say here, an information literacy question. I mean, in so many ways, this is an epistemological question. Like, this is the big question. To what degree can our conscious selves understand the source of our unconscious processing? How much can we trust it? How far can we go with it? How far can reflection take us? And there's a big spectrum out there in the literature from, like Joseph Ledoux says, the brain can do this, no problem. And Antonio Damasio, who's on the other side, is like, no way, this can't happen. We really can't trust and know where our feeling of knowing comes for. To me, moving to reflective practice and trying to get us to think back to ourselves and to know where our intentions come from is the obvious first step. But as you could probably tell, I don't have all the answers. And so with this, I want to invite everyone to come on this journey and to see what we can learn and how we might be able to do that. So with this, I'll just say thank you, and I'm happy to take, do we have time for a few questions? Okay, happy to take any questions. Or not, it's okay.
Hi, so my name's Valerie. I am obviously a librarian, but I am also a violist. So this weekend I'm preparing for a performance of Brahms' Requiem. So I'm thinking a lot about you talked about like the neuroscience of learning, and that it's kind of like you have the idea of mastery when you do something over and over and over again. And the mind's goal is to automate it. Right. So I've been thinking about this as I practice this piece. I played more than once. Right. That my brain's goal is clearly to get it automatic. And last night I was able to practice with my 3-year-old screaming at me. So I'm on my way.
It's amazing.
But when you were saying that, I was thinking, is when you combine learning, mastery, and kind of the goal of automating things, is this where the flow state comes from?
Yeah. Yes, I would say. And the book flow is good. Yeah. So the goal, right, is to not be present. And there's all kind. If you ask a Major League Baseball player how they hit a baseball, the first step there often is like, you don't think about it, right? Like, and all kinds of experts. Sports is always the great metaphor because to turn off. The more you think, the more you can make mistakes. But yeah, and of course, right, there's exceptions. There's times where we want to be actively thinking. Like, I don't want the takeaway to be that we should be just on autopilot, because that doesn't help us. I mean, arguably, right, the reason that humans have iPads and have gone to the moon and sharks haven't is because I think we could say rationality and science and those things matter, right? Evidence matters. I don't want us to walk away and think that stuff doesn't. So the goal is that we can interrupt that kind of automated processing when we need to do that. There's all kinds of great research about where they, especially with musicians, like tennis players, where they can see the fMRI imaging of the brain and the parts that they think are correlated with that, how they can really see like those things light up in major ways, and then cool down. It's interesting, right? When you're learning something new, your brain explodes. Learning in so many ways in the brain is a focusing process. So when you start out with something new and it's hard and you're juggling, what's really happening is that multiple areas of the brain are on fire trying to figure out whose turn it is to do what. And as you get better, that focusing becomes, or that cacophony focuses down to a narrow pathway, and they can watch that happen, which I think is unbelievable, so that the right parts get good at it for the right thing, and then those pathways strengthen. So yeah, it's really, really fascinating. I don't know if I answered your question, but rambling. Who else? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Steve Adams from Northwestern. I'm thinking a lot about bandwidth, since that's the theme of the conference, and thinking about how we love to stack duties on to positions. Anyone have stacked duties? How do we maintain a quest for mastery of a thing when we keep getting asked to do extra, more? How do you recommend that we get on a path to mastery?
Yeah.
With
So-
the ways our organizations are organized and structured.
It's a great question. I wish I had like a clear, amazing answer, and I have a lot of coworkers in here, so they're probably laughing to think, oh, like, you know, they see me at work. You know, I don't know, except to say that since we know that repetition and focus makes mastery happen, we have to be able to find time to wedge out for the things that are important to us and figure out what's not important. And the myth that we can just do more with less is just, you know, it's a myth. There's only so much that we can do. So what do we decide not to do? And I mean, again, I don't know, but just to say that if it's a thing you really want to be a master at, you have to find time to do it. And it's interesting, you know, I finished the book, and like last year, I felt like, you know, it came out last summer, so like the winter before that, I was writing, and I feel like I knew this stuff, you know, so much. I'd spent years into this, right? And now I've taken a little break, like okay, enough of this. I haven't thought about it for a while, and I've gone on to, you know, other work, and now this week I've given a couple talks, this talk, and I've gotten back into it, and I realized, you know, how important like this line of writing is for me and thinking, and I've had that thought, like, how do I find more time in my day to read more stuff to be able to think about what comes next in these ideas. So I don't know if I have the answer, but maybe some hints in there. So good question. Yeah. Microphone's coming.
You too. So I'm one of the K-12 librarians here, and I was really struck by one of your final thoughts about like novice learners viewing research as transactional while an expert is more situated. And I'm thinking through that like an approach to information literacy that takes this feeling of knowing into consideration. But I'm also recognizing that like those of us at this table work exclusively with novice learners, right? And I'm trying to think how to sort of bring that idea to a novice learner who is, like, how do I teach a novice learner about that concept of their feeling of knowing when their information landscape is very much filled with TikToks that are saying things that are inaccurate but feel true to them.
Right. Yeah. Yes, the challenge. And so when you're thinking like high school or below?
I work with middle schools.
Middle school, okay, yeah. And I got it. So just number one, big asterisk again. Child development is absolutely not. You know, you read it, and I've done some, and there's definitely, I think, the younger grades, right? The brain is just on fire, right? The brain is at work. The brain is growing, and there's probably some of those basic skills that have to get built before you can get in to some of this, right? I guess I don't exactly know, but even just to make, you know, step one, there's, I'll talk a little bit about this in the breakout sessions this afternoon, but there's these kind of 4 steps of like Buddhist meditation that I think are always very interesting. And it's sort of like you start out and you're totally ignorant. Step 2 is you're aware that you're ignorant, right? So, you know, step 1 for all of us is like just to know that the feeling of knowing is a thing. And I don't think that, I think that, you know, junior high kids are absolutely aware, knowing my kids, to make that recognition. There's a reason why you find this convincing. Now, how you get to the other steps beyond that, I would much defer to all of you who are experts with those grades. But I think just, you know, can we make people aware of it is the beginning, and then to show the answer. I think about, there's a good friend of mine who used to work with us at Moraine Valley. He's gone on to other things, but he's a writing teacher, and he wanted to make an argument, a rhetorical argument about, to talk about how we're convinced by things. So he showed a class a documentary about 9/11 truthers, and these people arguing how the government, you know, did 9/11, blew up the towers, and then he showed them the Popular Mechanics documentary that refuted it. But half the class didn't believe the Popular Mechanics video, and he was like, what the hell do I do? Like, so we had to come in and do some intensive interventions to try to get students to see, like, let's look at this evidence and like, why do you believe this? Why do you find it compelling? And I still worry there was a couple that came out of that, so he didn't do that again. But like the kind of lessons that you have that kind of you don't recognize how it's going to go till you do it. So yeah, are we still? We're still good. One more. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. So I'm in the high school, and so working with kids that are a little closer to your age. And I'm curious, from a pragmatic perspective, have you have this idea that I think is very compelling about how there's a necessity of reflection of one's own, what they know, their feelings, their biases, et cetera. Have you actually tried to implement this idea in a classroom, and if so, how did you do it?
Yeah, not as much as I should have, number one. I have done some work with a couple faculty members, and actually we've done presentations not quite like this, where it's so information literacy focused, like for professionals, but using these questions, especially with like new college students, they love a lot of these kind of brain twister questions, and then asking them to think about like why they found that compelling. Now, we haven't gone too much further than that, so I got to say there's still a lot of work to do in terms of that. One thing, I had some conversations with recently with some librarians at the University of New Mexico libraries, and we were talking about like finding a topic, and this is hard. There's so much limitations by just the system that we're in. I think especially like at our school where it's like a 16-week semester, and you see a student 3 times for an hour. There's only so much you can do, right? There's only so deep, but if you had students like pull up articles and get to know these articles, and then ask them which articles are most compelling, and then get them to ask the why question, like, why is this compelling? And again, get to that reflection, like, what is the why? Why is this one better than this one? And have students like maybe pick out 10 articles and have them narrow it down to 5 articles. What are the 5 best articles? And then say, well, why? What's the criteria? Like how? And then that gets them to dig in a little bit. And you can't do that without being reflective, without knowing what your criteria is, which then becomes pointing back at yourself. I haven't done that, by the way, but we were kind of brainstorming some possibilities. So, yes. Right there. Yeah.
Hello. Oh, hi. My name is Mackenzie. I'm from the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. I came in a little late, so if you cover this at the beginning, I apologize. I'm really interested in this whole concept, but I'm curious, have you thought about the value of not knowing in research?
There's not a lot about it in my book. I'm actually reading a book called The Psychology of Stupidity. I've been working through that, and it's great. And it does talk about some of that. I don't know, and there's also research, especially in medicine, right, with like false positives and things like that about times when it's better to not have information, which I just find as a librarian to be like, that can't be true. Like there's times where we shouldn't have information because we get bad outcomes. I just don't want to believe that. So talk about reflection, right? But not as much. Do you have thoughts on what that might be? I'd love to hear it.
Not explicitly. No, I think some of it is about like staying open. And I think that when it's ironic, when you know that you don't know, right? So like not knowing a thing kind of allows you to enter into a research process or an idea or exploration in a little bit of a different manner than even when you think you know something. So I think I'm also at art school, so this is part of that. So right. I totally understand.
Yeah. Just sort of tangential on that, there's some really amazing research about what makes creativity happen. And there's a line of theory that thinks to be creative means turning off that conscious self. The best artists are able to go into, instead of me stumbling on a source that activates my feeling of knowing, they go into that and find those connections and then bring it out, right? But that you can't do it consciously, which doesn't mean that there's no practice. It doesn't mean that there's a master. It doesn't mean that there's all those pieces, right? But some real, like, how do we build those connections? What is the source of creativity? I actually have a couple of books on my reading list that explore that. I think, there's a good article, like 20 years ago about information literacy and creativity, and I'm going to freeze who wrote it, but I think there's definitely a path there that needs some work. So, yeah. We good? Jason's looking at his watch.
I get a question in there for you, Troy.
Yes.
during your presentation, you showed a couple of slides that related to the threshold concepts in the framework for information literacy. Some of you might know that one of Dr. Swanson's many contributions to the profession was working on that document for all of us. And so the question is, with your deep dive into neuroscience here, does threshold concepts as a guiding structure for that document, does it hold up? Would a neuroscience say this is an appropriate application of threshold science? Threshold concepts, does it work for what we want it to do?
I mean, I think most neuroscience would say that's up to us probably, but I think, does it contradict what the science says? I would say probably not. I mean, to me, it makes sense. This idea of growth, and I think the goal of the threshold concepts, right, is that we think about where the novice learner is, we think about what's the habits of mind and the skills we want them to have to get to move toward expertise. And I don't know that we ever envisioned that we think our students at whatever level they're at hit that expertise, or that any of us absolutely hit this, the end threshold, right? But that there's steps that we take that once we've taken them, we can't go back. And I think that does line up with what neuroscientists would say, that once you have that experience, you can't unhave that experience. And that you're building your schemas as you go, and that it also, that you have to live it and go through it, and you can't be just told it sometimes, because that's how you build the experiences. So yes, I think it makes a lot of sense. And in fact, I think some of the research may help flush out where, make more, like I said, like what happens in that liminal space in between as we're building. So yes, I think that absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. I think there's some things in the framework that we could do better with this. Like I think we touch on it, but we didn't quite get there. So yeah.
Can I just talk in there? Okay. I was struck by I don't know who the 8th president is. When we face students in a computer lab, they already think they know more than you do. I already know all this.
Yeah.
Because I can find a pair of tennis shoes, do we have to convince them that, no, you don't already know this?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's useful to show people what they don't know. I mean, sometimes there's only so far you can go. I mean, they have to get to the moment where they recognize it. And I think all of us are like that. Like, how many times have you seen something and then a few years later you're like, oh, I get why other people care about that. Or maybe that's just me, I don't know. Like, I think it's a thing, and now like, I get it, finally. Now I get why everyone likes this thing or whatever. And so I think that's sort of the reality of learning, It's at the moment, hopefully the teacher arises, but if they're not ready, you can only force it so much, so yeah. All right. Is Jason giving the signal?
Any other questions? Got probably room for one more.
Hi, my name is Ben. I'm from Dominican University. Excuse me. My question is, in reading the book, there's some discussion about kind of this connection between intelligence and intuition and kind of like trusting your gut. Do you think we should be teaching students to kind of trust your gut, or teach students to be very wary of that gut and be very wary of your intuition?
Yeah, so yes. I mean, I think, right, step one is to recognize the gut. So many times I see students, especially doing research, where they come in and they know the thesis and they're just finding the information to plug in to believe what they already believe, right? And so that's a moment where you want them to kind of check it a little bit and be like, well, why do you think this? I just think that's true for all of it. Like, there's times that just to know that the gut's there, and sometimes your gut's right, and sometimes it's not. And I think that's the challenge with it, right? There is a thing that comes out of it's out of therapy, really. That's called the felt sense. It's focusing by Gendlin is the author. It's from University of Chicago, and basically it's kind of like meditative. So you calm yourself and you ask yourself a question, and you wait for a response, and you ask for a word, and you can. So a question could be like how to deal with an issue, or why do I feel this way, or any kind of question. It doesn't mean that this is right? This is a reflective practice, and then you grab onto, you ask your body for a word, and then you center it in your chest, and you wait for a bodily response. And sometimes you can, it will open up a direction or a feeling, and how to make, it's a way to make a decision. And so the thought is that you are taking your conscious self and you're asking your unconscious self a question and having that interaction and trying to get both sides, even though it's not actually both sides, there's multiple sides, to consolidate around a direction. And that's a whole messy way to explain it, so don't, look that up yourself. Focusing is the name of the practice, and Gendlin is the author. He's really, I think it's useful. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about that this afternoon in the breakout, is some of the ways that we can ask our unconscious selves questions and see what comes back to us consciously. So, okay, good. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.